Welcome to the SAFeTY Chronicles, exploring how to keep people and pets safe from the cycle of interpersonal violence. I am your host, Allie Phillips, founder and CEO of Sheltering Animals and Families Together, the SAFeTY program, a nonprofit organization working with domestic violence shelters to eliminate the pet housing barrier to safety. As the founder, I have led the global movement in helping domestic violence shelters create on-site pet housing while elevating the criminal justice response to how animal abuse links to crimes against people. I am a former prosecuting attorney, internationally recognized legal expert and public speaker, award-winning author, and advocate for protecting vulnerable victims. In this podcast, we will explore how and why animals are harmed in the cycle of family violence and the human-animal bond that keeps victims in harm's way with their pets. Guest speakers and I will share strategies for shelters and professionals working to safeguard survivors, why pet-inclusive sheltering is life-saving, and safety tips for those who need help. None of the content will be graphic. If you are in harm's way, please contact your nearest domestic violence shelter or call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Let's get started. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. So I have my coffee and my cat mug here. I got my cats here in my home office, and let's dive into today's topic. And I want to talk about Domestic Violence Awareness Month and a new approach to it. So every October, domestic violence agencies and advocates and supporters come together to raise awareness about the epidemic of domestic violence, to also honor those who have survived and to remember those who have been lost to these violent crimes. So I'm not sure if you knew this, but over 1 in 3 women, over 35%, and over 1 in 4 men, about 28%, in the United States have experienced rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner in their lifetime. That's over 35% of women and 28% of men. That is a huge number. And what it really comes out to is about 12 million women and men annually are victims of interpersonal violence in the United States. Now, add into that the work that I do with pets of domestic violence, and we have about 66% of American homes that have a pet. So when you work the math on this, that could be upwards of 8 million pets of domestic violence annually. 8 million pets and people that are together experiencing domestic violence in a home. So through my nonprofit, Sheltering Animals and Families Together, I raise awareness about the added factor of the human-animal bond that domestic violence victims have with their pets, and how beautiful that bond can be targeted and exploited by abusers and keep everyone unsafe. So all month long, in the month of October, which is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, I post bits of information and research to demonstrate what we know about the linkage between animal abuse and domestic violence. So what I want to talk about today is for you to think ahead to next year's Domestic Violence Awareness Month, to next October, and to ask you to think of what you can do a little differently. Now, if what you are doing is outrageously successful in raising awareness and raising funds for your shelter, then by all means, keep doing that. But if you want to take a different approach, I have some ideas. It is difficult for people in your community to hear about domestic violence, especially if they have not experienced it, but even more so if they have. It can be really difficult to hear the statistics, the numbers that I just shared with you of those who are harmed and killed each year. It's really difficult to hear the reality. And when something is difficult, we tune it out. It's just a protective measure that our brain does. I learned all of this in one of my trauma-informed coaching certifications that I received. Our brain will tune out something that is painful. So raising awareness to communities that may tune out this important information does not create the change in your community that you want. And domestic violence agencies who are trying to reach a broader community, a broader audience, could actually be turning away those who would truly want to help simply because the messaging is too painful. So I want to give you a different perspective on next October and give you time to think of how this would work for your domestic violence agency and for your community. So I want to give you just 5 ideas off the top of my head. And I want to make this offer that if you are a domestic violence shelter, if you are an animal organization, an animal shelter working with a domestic violence shelter, I am here. My organization is here to help you. I love to brainstorm. So please reach out. You can go to our website at saftprogram.org and submit a message and ask for a brainstorming session, because this is what I love to do. All right, so are you ready for these 5 ideas? Number 1, whether your agency has the ability to house pets of domestic violence or not, consider hosting a dog walk in your community. So many years ago, I created National SAFeTY Day, SAFT for Sheltering Animals and Families Together. And this was where on the first Saturday in October, SAFeTY Pet Inclusive Shelters would host a dog walk in their community. And I love how this really took off to where I didn't even need to make it a national day anymore. Maybe I'll bring it back. We'll see. But I just love that the shelters were picking this up and running with it. So in a dog walk, you can charge a small fee, like $25 per dog, or ask the people to get people to sponsor them for a certain amount of money for the length of the walk. So if it's a 5-mile walk, they could ask people, to sponsor $2 a mile, $10, anything like that to raise money. These are fun events. It's an opportunity to send home information on the link between violence to animals and domestic violence with the participants. And even some shelters host a dog Halloween costume contest, which just adds to the joy of the event. People with pets love these events. They can be fun, and they can be an easy way to raise money and to let people know about your shelter in an uplifting way that also raises awareness. So it just shifts the focus to something more lighthearted and joyful, but yet you can send home a flyer in a thank you goodie bag that just lets them know that, hey, did you know that pets can be targeted and exploited in domestic violence, and shelters that are not welcoming pets on site, it creates a barrier to safety? Did you know that? It can be something as simple like that, just to let them know that you either are a pet inclusive domestic violence shelter, or maybe you are working towards becoming that. And this could be an opportunity to have a new donor. All right, number 2, you could host a breakfast, a lunch, a dinner, a cocktail event, and invite community leaders, community members, and citizens, and showcase survivor stories with their pets, and not the tragedy necessarily of what they encountered, but focus on the happy ending. And maybe it's a happy ending that they experienced because you are a pet inclusive shelter. You did welcome them in. You did keep them safe and provided resources and helped them with finding housing that was pet friendly after the shelter. And while the stories of the abuse can be powerful, they are difficult for most people to hear. I mean, I'm a former prosecutor who has heard countless stories of horrific violence. And I'll be honest, it's difficult for me to hear at this point. I do better with the uplifting stories that are focused into the future on how a survivor and their pet is healing and is in recovery and has resiliency because they stayed with their pet. These basically become a day of joy event. And you actually may get more people showing up to support your efforts if they know that this is going to be all positive, uplifting, amazing stories of resiliency and recovery and healing and celebrating the human animal bond, these joyful events draw more people in. All right, number 3, you could have an award ceremony for a pet of domestic violence who was a hero to his or her family. Maybe this pet protected the family or blocked the abuser or was the final reason that the victim finally left and got into shelter because the victim of the domestic violence finally said, "You cannot hurt my pet." And I see that a lot. I see so many victims of domestic violence who the final straw is either going after the child or going after the pet. So if it's a pet, you could host a hero award event, and it can be a very uplifting and joyful ceremony celebrating one or more animals that really went above and beyond and became a hero to their family and literally saved their lives. Number 4, you could hold a blessing of the animals event. These typically occur in October, so it's perfect timing. And these blessing of the animals events happen throughout many communities, and it's an opportunity to bring citizens in your community together with their pet to an event that you are hosting, and the animal receives a blessing. Those people who come could be sent home with materials that showcase how animals can be harmed in domestic violence. You never know when this information could get into the hands of somebody who is unaware of your services and unaware of their options for safety with their pet. And then last, number 5, you could host a yappy hour or a coffee with kitties or cocktails with canines gathering to raise money, bring people together in a fun, lighthearted, joyful evening gathering, or it could be a morning gathering, a coffee with kitties, and just charge a small admission fee. It could be $10, it could be $25. So many years ago, when I was running a small nonprofit that was assisting a local animal shelter, we hosted one of these events, and it was at the home of one of our board members. All of the board members made food and desserts. We had drinks donated, and our out of pocket expenses were very small. I want to say it was less than $500 because we all donated so much, and we raised over $20,000 in that evening. Now, we charged quite a bit. I think we charged about $100 per person or $150 for a couple. And I was amazed. I was amazed at how much money we raised. So people love to come together to celebrate and raise money for animals. And this is an opportunity for a domestic violence shelter to really capitalize on it, especially if you are housing pets on site or you have made the decision that you want to. You're working with the SAFeTY program and we'll help you get started, and you can start raising money for your initial costs. So these are just 5 ideas that literally came to me off the top of my head this morning. And there are endless options of how you can incorporate animals into your next Domestic Violence Awareness Month and also shift the focus to healing, resiliency, and recovery. And when you do this, you're going to reach a broader audience of potential supporters because you've incorporated animals, and it's a more joyful, uplifting event that isn't going to leave people feeling shocked and saddened or even traumatized. So it's just recognizing that you can get your message across without the sad stories, without the traumatic stories. You can do it in a really uplifting, positive way. So, like I said, if you want to brainstorm, I love to brainstorm. I'm really good at it. I just come up with really creative, innovative ideas. I've always been this way. It's just one of my gifts that I have, and I'm here to help you. So I hope this information is helpful as we finish out Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And I just hope it gives you some ideas going into next year's Domestic Violence Awareness Month that you can shift things up a little bit and reach a greater audience. Because my goal is for you to have the support, the resources, and the funding to house pets on site. All right. Thanks for joining in. And be sure to subscribe to this podcast and share this with somebody. If you're hearing this and you do not work at a domestic violence agency, please share it if you know somebody that does. Thanks for tuning in. I'll talk to you next time. If you are in harm's way and need help, please visit the Pet Inclusive Shelter listing at safetyprogram.org, call your nearest domestic violence shelter, or call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Want to support our efforts and help us keep the SAFeTY Startup Manual free for domestic violence shelters? Consider donating at safetyprogram.org/donate. Your donation saves lives.